Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Hang, and I'm here today with Debbie Wijaya. She's the Chief Product Officer at Zero Gravity, but I should probably let her do her own introduction. Debbie, take it away.
Hi everyone, good to see you all, and I hope you don't hate me yet. So yeah, as Hank said, I came here from the product side. So I'm currently a chief product officer at a company called Zero Gravity. It's a mission-driven company to help low-income students in the UK, specifically right now, to get them into good universities and later to good career. We do this through like mentoring, master classes, events, just to help level the playing field. In the past 12 years, I've been building and managing products. And yeah, of course, with my experience in the industry, I do have opinions about, let's say, who should do user research or what kind of collaborations uh, should a PM and a designer have. So yeah, would love to discuss all of this with you.
Yeah, I'm just so grateful that you're willing to do this today because it's not an easy conversation oftentimes. I personally have had some pretty challenging conversations with PMs at my workplace. And I feel like even then, it's like the gloves are on because you need to be very professional. You need to continue this working relationship. But when it comes to the world of LinkedIn and social media, it's like all gloves are off. Everything's, just we can just say whatever we want and just kind of like talk shit about the other side. So yeah, I really appreciate it because this is not an easy conversation anyway. And I guess we should probably start off with the thread that started it all, maybe about a week ago or so. Teresa Torres, the author of Continuous Discovery book, and that is actually quite popular among product managers and even designers as well, uh, asked well, she put out this public post asking for people to give examples of where her book or her writing has negatively affected user researchers or designers on the UX side when it comes to layoffs. And it did not, I guess it went well in that it created a lot of engagement. There are over 600 likes
Mhm.
and support emojis and over 300 comments that were made and also 30 reposts. So this is a very popular post, but there is quite a bit of maybe controversy or disagreement in the threads. At one point, she tagged Debbie Levitt asking for exact stories or connections with people who have said things about how continuous discovery has affected their job status in some way or um, at their company. So it just kind of degrades in some way as we read further. And there's some also comments from Jeremy Miller that I thought was really interesting because Jeremy, who's a good friend of mine, is usually very, very easygoing, doesn't really say a lot of controversial things, but he really went off here, or he went loose here and just said about how his entire team was laid off and how
Mm.
while the book might not have directly contributed to it, but it might have contributed more of a, I would say, maybe the kind of thinking that led to it eventually. So it's quite controversial in some ways, and yeah, I would just love to get your take on it as well from the product side because I know we shared it earlier, and you had a lot of opinions on this as well.
Yeah, I found so that thread I couldn't stop reading it, even though reading it actually made me quite angry at both sides. I found both sides to be frustrating. Um, I I think first of all, I didn't find the discussion constructive in any way because um, companies in the end they just want to get the most out of the people that we have that they have, right? The highest amount of profit for the lowest amount of resources. So they do layoffs, and um, it's just quite sad actually when people ended up blaming each other for the layoffs instead of blaming the actual leadership team. So that's the dream of a business owner or business investor, that they did the layoff, but then the people were fighting against each other instead of blaming them. Um, so I think my general view when I was reading that thread is that I'm not justifying the layoffs in any way, but I think it's also ridiculous to say that only researchers should do research. In the same way that actually, if you look at the composition of a product engineering team, maybe from 10 years ago, there are lots of roles that got folded into multiple roles, like QA, for example. Most companies don't have QA anymore. The separation between front end and back end engineers. Lots of companies now just have full stack engineers. So I think that's the trend, that companies want to try to get people to do multiple roles as much as possible. Again, to maximize the profit with just the least amount of resources possible. And yes, I do agree that researchers, like a dedicated researcher, would do a much better job than a PM or designer on research. But it's ridiculous to say that only researchers can do research. It's as unreasonable as saying that only data analysts should analyze the data. Or only sales marketing should think about how we can sell the product. Like, frankly speaking, from the PM's perspective, you are expected to be able to do all of those, right? And at the end, the PMs are also worried about their security, like their job security. So, of course, it's in everyone's best interest to try to make themselves indispensable as possible.
Yeah, I think, we chatted briefly last night where we kind of just shared our inner thinking so that we have a rough idea of which direction the other side will go on. And it kind of became clear that we agree on more things than we don't. And it kind of kills the whole vibe when it comes to trying
Boo.
to, create a fight here. And I agree with you in that it would be ridiculous to say only one function should be able to do one thing, right? And there are often cases where you just don't have enough resources on one side to really dedicate it to that. And there is a lot of unnecessary infighting. Like, I think, I've written quite a bit about my challenges in working with product management and how it's been extremely difficult as a UX designer who's more on the
Mm,
research or strategy side
mm,
to get access to users, because sometimes the PM doesn't want to give you access. They want to gatekeep access to their users and customers, or they don't really disseminate the kind of strategy or the roadmap that they're working on, or maybe there isn't a roadmap at all. So at the end of the day, I realized that my challenges with PMs has more to do with the PM's skill set, or maybe a lack of skills, as opposed to their original intention or the original intended function, right? And I would say yes, if you were to look at some of the rough data so far coming out, maybe researchers have been a little bit more disproportionately affected. But if you also look at the data created by Catherine Brookshire, who's a user researcher at Indeed, she showed that user research roles have steadily increased in the last 5 or 10 years. And even with the current layoffs, it's still on a very upward trajectory. So researchers are definitely getting more roles. They're getting more action in a way than ever before. But yeah, I just don't. And I have to also say that, like, maybe I'm a little bit biased, but Debbie Levitt, the person who originally wrote the comments arguing with Teresa Torres, I started out in content creation on her show pretty early on, and I think my first 1,000 or 5,000 followers actually came directly from her. So I actually owe her quite a bit, but I would disagree with her that there's a direct correlation between how people are getting laid off right now on the research side with the book, because I
mm,
don't think the people who decide who to lay off necessarily have read Teresa Torres's books, or they're at the point
yeah.
where they're not PMs oftentimes. And I would say the worst PMs I've worked with, I'm pretty sure they haven't read Teresa Torres's books at all. And like, I've asked them, like, maybe we can find some kind of grounding, some similar understanding. Like, which
Yeah.
books do you really like, which authors do you really like, and they haven't read books like Marty Kagan's Inspired or Escaping the Bill Trap by Melissa Perry. Like they just don't read, and it's kind of the problem. So I don't see that correlation, but I could believe in some way that the idea that PMs can take care of research in a way that can affect the wider perception of who can you lay off, who's expandable to the business.
Yeah. Yeah. I think those two are, in my head, there are two distinct topics, right? About PMs not being qualified enough, not experienced enough, and hence make your life as a designer a lot more difficult, versus Teresa Torres' book causing researchers to be devalued and maybe in a difficult economic times then be the first one to chop off. I actually I've never seen them as like one topic. So if I could address maybe like one by one separately, on the PM versus designer one, or say calling it versus is already not starting it from the right angle. So I do agree that a junior PM can make the squad's lives a lot more difficult. And it's not just for the designer, right? It's also difficult for the engineers, because product managers, they are not entry level position. They are not a junior position. You have to have a good amount of experience to lead the team, a good amount of understanding of the users, of the technology, of the business, because PMs is like this three intersection between the three: technology, UX, and business. And of course, when somebody is responsible for all three, and has to always continuously juggle all three, while engineers, they only need to care about the technology, and let's say UX designers only need to care about the UX side. Of course, there will be some tensions, because whatever the PM decides, basically there will be 2/3 roughly of their stakeholders who are unhappy about it. So I would say like it is a difficult job, and maybe when the demand of number of PMs required during the tech boom and everyone was hiring, suddenly all old companies, even like traditional companies, want to hire PMs, then there's just an influx of junior PMs coming into the market. And then maybe get promoted relatively quickly, as you said, like the over titled PMs, even with relatively junior experience. So I could understand that frustration. I could say a similar frustration about the design side, if I may. I also, like when I was interviewing for senior designers, I also found there are lots of people who definitely don't deserve the title of senior designers. And actually, my objections were similar to you, like they don't care enough about the users, they don't do enough research, they just design what looks beautiful. So actually, even though our frustration comes from the opposite side, I think the common ground that we have here is that somebody who doesn't know how to do their job in a well-rounded way, so maybe over-indexing on one thing, let's say over-indexing on the aesthetic of the design, or over-indexing on the business side of the product instead of the user experience. As a whole, they are bringing damage to the product engineering design squad.
Yeah, this is the frustrating part because I want to fight over something where I'm having a hard time finding something to really argue over. And I agree with you with everything you're saying. And maybe to give a little bit more color, I would say, I've never actually worked with a junior product manager before. And I might actually be okay if they were titled a junior product manager. The challenges has been they're usually a director level or even VP level. And they're not really product managers though, because they come from other functions. Like they're very business minded. They might have a lot of esoteric knowledge in the technology or in the business side of
Mm,
this industry and product line. So like if you're in fintech, they might know the back office, the technology of data transfer really, really well.
yeah.
And they've been in the industry for like 10, 15 years, but they know very little about actually managing a tech product. And that's where we run into issues because they don't actually know how to build these things very well. They just know how things work really well. And then
Mm,
they draw into their own experiences. They say, I've been doing this for 15 years. I know exactly what the user needs, what they want. So let's just build this, right? And they don't really understand lean or agile either because they're just kind of thinking about it in terms of command and control. Like, I think we should build this. And I think that's the challenge that I feel design is facing. And I would agree with you that designers also can oftentimes be over level. I've been there. Like I was over leveled early on in my career for sure. And that causes issue for sure. I think the key difference is that design is almost always reporting up to product. So when you're working with a not ideal product manager, the power dynamics is not on your side. So even if you are more capable, you're more skilled, you can't really convince them if they don't want to be convinced because there is that power dynamic at play. Whereas if you are working with a junior designer who is over
mm,
leveled and they report up to you, you have more control over the situation. You can kind of mitigate the
yeah.
damage that's being done.
Can I clarify when you said report to you? Do you actually talk about? Are you actually referring to line management reporting or just in the squad?
Both cases. So one example would be at some of the companies I've worked at, there might be a VP of design, but the VP of design will
Mm,
report up to the chief product officer. There might
okay,
be a director of design, but they report up to the VP of product. So oftentimes design is reporting directly into the product side.
I
And
see.
the
I
other
see.
issue is that product typically has a direct connection with the senior stakeholders, the executives. They have more face time and
Mm,
they download the instructions from the higher ups. So they have more influence, even if they are lower level. Like one of the most difficult situations I've been in is I was a staff level designer at a company, and my product partner was probably like 2 levels below in terms of experience, in terms of leveling. But because they have a direct line to the chief product officer, which I didn't, they had a lot more clout than I would, no matter what.
yeah.
So even though I don't directly report up to this product manager, if we were to
Yeah.
have, differences in opinions about something, I have very little I have very little ways of convincing them because they don't need to be convinced. They just can directly make these decisions. And also the understanding of senior higher level ups is that the PM gets to decide what to build. They're the mini CEO oftentimes. So it's like a lot of different components at play that kind of works against the designer.
Yeah. I I understand. Sorry, you said so many things that I want to respond to. I kind of have
Sorry.
forgotten now. The first point is like when you're talking about a VP of product or product director or product leader, basically, who has never done product before. Like honestly, it's as annoying to me as it is to you.
Yeah.
Because yeah, they don't understand the concept of building an MVP, for example, so that we can get user feedback. They don't understand the concept of user research and testing ideas. So I found it as frustrating as you do as well. In terms of product managers having more power and maybe more contact time, more access to the leadership team or to the stakeholders, so that um, if they're junior, it's harder rather than if the designer is junior. I do agree. I mean I cannot really apologize for that because that's just how the
It's
structure
not your
is, right? Like
fault. Yeah.
yeah, that's just how the structure is. Like if you want more power, be a product manager. I would cheekily say it's well, like to be fair, it's also unless the junior product manager is having a delusion that they are actually doing a very good job and they are amazing, even though everyone else doesn't think so. So unless they have a delusion, I would say that it's actually a very tough job and not a pleasant journey at all for them as well, because when the PM is junior, and they have to interface with, let's say, VP of marketing, let's say, or VP of operations, or whatever the stakeholder is, the PM almost has no say and has no authority, not enough like knowledge to argue anything against the senior stakeholders. So because they can't fight back to those senior stakeholders, then of course when they come back to their team, they will just have to say like, okay, we need to build this because the stakeholder said so, and I don't know whether they would say it explicitly, but I have no way to argue with that. So what I'm saying is the PM, the junior PM, is also suffering, in my opinion, and again, unless they're deluded, and it's actually the fault of the leader of the organization. Like, why would you put somebody so junior in such a difficult position? Like when the stakeholders, external stakeholders, are senior, when the team, the engineers and the designers are senior, why would you put a junior PM there?
Yeah, that's totally fair. And I think the part that I actually kind of dislike about this conversation we're having right now is that I feel like I'm taking out all my frustrations from the past 10 years onto you. I'm like complaining about all these difficulties that I've encountered as a designer. And that's not really fair because you can't apologize for that. That's not your fault. You're not even on the same continent that I'm in. And it's unfair. And I recognize that the PM is also under a ton of pressure. I think my frustration oftentimes is that they refuse to see it as an issue. As in, like if they just told me, "Hey, Hang, we're in the same boat here. We need to change how senior executives see the product development process and fold in user centricity or whatnot," but they don't, because doing exactly what the senior stakeholders say and tell them to do is quite good for them. I've worked with PMs who were promoted very quickly, every like twice in the span of a year and a half, to director levels, because they did exactly what the senior stakeholders are asking for, which is deliver more, deliver faster. And when I pull up the numbers showing that these things aren't really creating the kind of outcomes we're looking for in terms of engagement, profit, whatnot, the business metrics, it gets shot down because I'm in a way trying to make them look bad because they now have, they're feeding into the reward system at play. But I would agree with you that ultimately it's not their fault in some ways that they refuse to see something that clearly would detract from their salary and their career trajectory.
Yeah.
So
I think now I'm evaluating how good the company is by looking at the discrepancy between how they promote, incentivize their employees versus what is actually good, like successful outcome for the users. And I would want to be in a company where there's almost no discrepancy, right? So people who are doing good work for the users and hence bringing successful business outcome are the ones that are getting promoted. Then that's the kind of company that I would want to be in, or I would want to create now that I'm in the leadership position. And yeah, the worst kind of company, I would say, incentivizing all sorts of negative behavior, is if there is a discrepancy and the kind of behavior of, I don't know, being too political, for example, maneuvering really skillfully and just say the right things to the right people, get promoted. Then yeah, you basically the business leaders, they create this problem on their own. And I'm just hopeful sometimes that that they will eventually get the repercussion of this kind of bad decisions. Maybe not now, maybe like in 3 years their company or product is crumbling down because they never care about the most fundamental things. That's my secret wish. Sometimes came true, sometimes not.
So several years ago, I, along with the entire product and design team, were laid off by a company, and all our roles were moved to Eastern Europe. as kind of like a cost cutting, cost saving procedure. And at the time, we all said, this is going to be the death of the company. You're removing all this institutional knowledge, people who've been here for 10 plus years, people who understand our users, who are all mostly based in the US, in Western Europe, etc. And you're replacing them with new people who know very little about the industry,
Mm.
very little about how, apps are designed in the US, for example. And we all said those things. And then I spoke to somebody who was hired, who's part of the new hires. And I asked about, how have things been? Are things great? And
Mm.
everything is fine. Like, I I agree with you. Like, I wish that companies kind of paid a price for making these decisions around product and design. And oftentimes it just doesn't happen. Like, these business decisions actually work out, unfortunately,
Yeah,
at least
yeah.
in the short term.
This is actually like something that's on the top of my mind. Like, just frankly speaking, as a product leader now, I'm working with a certain budget, and I was thinking, like, would I rather hire one person here in the UK or two people in Eastern Europe, for example, with the same budget, right? And the framework that I'm trying to use is like, is this role a missionary role or a mercenary role? Like, can I afford that this role is filled by somebody who has almost zero context and maybe zero motivation to understand the context as well? They just want to get the job done. So mercenary type of role, or do I really need somebody who's bought in with the mission and bringing in lots of context? So I'm actually thinking a lot about this right now. And yeah, I think it could work. Like, this kind of business decision could work for some roles, but not uh, the others. Can I just respond to the latest comment from Ricardo here? It's like amazed me. Like, to me, it's baffling that engineering product designs are rewarded for completely different things. Um, I yeah, it baffled me as well. My company is currently doing like KPIs and targets for 2024. And last year, product and engineering have two different sets of KPIs. Design is under product. And this year, like since I joined, basically I'm fighting for a joint KPI, because it doesn't make sense to me if, let's say, an engineering KPI such as the test coverage of the software is only an engineering KPI and not a product KPI, because then as a PM, I would have all the incentive to ask engineers to cut corners, and to not care about the actual robustness of the software in exchange to delivering more features, right? But that's not the kind of behavior I want to incentivize. And similarly, if, let's say, the product KPI would be weekly active users, let's say, and if that is only a product KPI and not an engineering KPI, then it's actually really unfair for the product team as well, because the engineers are the one actually building the features, and they should be incentivized to build in, like, within the time frame and to the uh, user requirements that we have agreed on to deliver that kind of impact.
I'm so glad you picked this one out, because I remember talking to a PM about this, and I said, why do we have asymmetrical goals here? This makes zero sense. Like, we're actually competing against each other in many ways. And that's super tough. I want to ask you this question, because this is the part that I personally struggle with. So I'm a designer who is very strategy oriented, or very I guess research oriented as well. Like, my visual design skills is probably my weakest point. And I've noticed in the last 3 years or so that there's now this premium placed on visual design abilities, or being able to create a lot of assets that are high quality, beautiful, usable. And if you were to ask me 5 years ago where I thought the trajectory of designers would be going toward, like what kind of skill sets should you be emphasizing, I would have said strategy and research, talking to users, etc. 5 years ago. And I remember saying that to a lot of people, and I was completely wrong. I was completely off base. And part of it is my belief is that designers are now leaning toward visual design because all this other stuff we're talking about, strategy and research, is taken over by the PM side, because that's something that they want to own. And oftentimes when the PM is hiring a designer, which seems to be kind of the case, or I've noticed that, like, if I'm interviewing at a company, there's always a PM interviewing me, and oftentimes the main decision maker is a PM. Whereas when PMs are hired at companies I've worked at, designers are almost never part of the interview process, or if they are, they're kind of more like a, meet and greet. Like, here's who we're going to hire, so we want you to, like, feel like you're part of the process. But if you were to say no, this person, we shouldn't hire them, you don't have that veto power. So I kind of want to get your take on this. Like, designers are kind of being pushed into doing visual design, and is there a path for designers who are more strategy oriented? Like, do you just kind of go into the PM role, or do you keep doing this? Because there should be some value here. And how would you position yourself to a PM such as yourself?
That's an astute question. And my honest answer, and this is purely subjective based on my experience, right? When I'm hiring a new designer now, I'm also more leaning towards somebody who can produce like beautiful UI. And my motivation is that because I think the standard of software products in the past 5 years have just gone up to the roof. Like now, like a clunky looking product doesn't cut it anymore. So I do need somebody who can produce like really strong UI visuals as well. But the thing is, if you work in an organization like with more than one designer, you don't actually need more than, I don't know, 1 or 2 people who can create like a beautiful design system, and the rest just following, like using the design system. So you don't need everyone to be strong in UI, I would say. And actually, I still remember like 2019, I had a conversation about this topic with my CTO back then, and he said similar thing to you, which is the role of a UI designer will be redundant in the next few years because now we have design system. So you don't need many people who are strong in UI. So their UX skill combined with a commercial skill would be like their main power. So yeah, basically TLDR, I think UI is super important because the standard is so high. But if you work in a bigger design team, not everyone has to be strong in UI. But if the question is there a place for a designer who's stronger on the strategy side, problem solving side? I think if I'm taking a pragmatic view as a product leader with a certain budget to spend, like certain number of headcounts that I could hire, basically, my pragmatic view is if I already have a strong PM that can do the strategy side, then I don't feel like I need to pay premium for a designer that is also strong in strategy. But if I don't have that skill in my team because my PM is junior, then I would love to get a designer who's also strong at strategy. And actually, as we mentioned briefly, is it last night or earlier today? Like, if I could only hire one person in my team, if I could only have one budget to hire one person in my team, I would rather hire a designer, because a good designer can do a PM's job, but a good PM cannot do a designer's job.
I appreciate that. And I'm going to say something kind of spicy here. I felt like when I work with subpar PMs, I get the sense that if we were to remove them and replace them with a senior designer, So you have the same headcount, right? Instead of a PM and a designer, you have two designers. You will get way more value. You would deliver more, and it would be more in line with the business goals in some ways, versus having one PM and one design, like one subpar PM and one designer. And some of the PMs, I feel like if you just remove the PM function entirely and said from now on the senior stakeholders will interface directly with the engineering lead and the design lead, you can actually get pretty far as well.
I'm going to give my opinion. And this is an opinion that I have formed independently, and then we can discuss how it agrees or disagrees with your opinion just now. So
I'm picking a fight.
from the PM side, I'm also seeing that the PM roles are also in danger, essentially, right? There is a company called Revolut in the UK. They're a fintech company. The CEO of Revolut quit and create a new company. And then he very clearly said in his job post to hire an engineer, they said, come join us. We have no PMs. So no PMs is a unique selling point for the
Oh my
company.
God.
So
Are
that's
they hiring
one.
in the US?
And then we have the Airbnb thing that the PM roles are being more folded into the PMM roles or combined into one. We have the linear one. So I'm seeing a trend that the PM roles gets devalued as well. And honestly, when I'm talking like personally to my husband, for example, I said I think the PM's job will be irrelevant or redundant in the next 5 years. That's my
Whoa.
honest and pessimistic take to where it's going. But that's why I think it's super important that a PM's job shouldn't be just directing the squad. So what I'm now teaching my PMs is that you are responsible for outcome, right? So it's more like PM as a GM. You are a general manager. Your job is not just building the features, not just the outcome of the features even, but if you need people to actually use the features and you need, let's say, engage with certain groups of influencers, like your power users, and get them to use the features more, get the early adoption, get the ball running. I want you, like my PMs, to actually manage that, manage the operational side, manage the go-to-market strategy side. So I think like from the PM side, that's how you can make your role more indispensable. Because if you focus too much on just, well, building features, say, or although you can frame it as not just building features, we are delivering outcome, but you are fully responsible for the outcome. So you are not just responsible for the digital product side of the outcome. You are also responsible for the other parts that's needed to make this digital product well received by the users.
I'm just gonna put up Ricardo's question again because I actually want to ask something as well. Do you see this more of an AI thing that PMs can be replaced, or is it more of you feel like PMs are under delivering value, or are the other roles like engineering and design upskilling in PM functions or PM function skills that make them an alternative to hiring a PM? Like, what's your main reason for why this might happen? Because that's a bold prediction in 5 years.
That's why I never said this prediction out loud. I'm just saying to my husband, let's get saving so we can retire in 5 years. I think, okay, multiple reasons. One is because the digital product world, like the software world, is already so competitive and maybe also so saturated. Like, you don't need another, I don't know, you don't need another food delivery app, for example. You don't need another restaurant or haircut booking app. So it's already so saturated that just building a beautiful digital product is not enough anymore. And if companies lean too much into that, I think that's not enough to create like a successful business. So I think in if I feel like there is a, if I could draw a graph of like the PM trend, PMs used to be like product owners or digital project managers, and then there's a rise of like strategic PM. I feel like now a lot of PMs that I'm talking to are going back down to just delivering features. So I think once the business think that these PMs are not bringing enough value, um, they're gonna, let's say, shut down the function, which is probably similar to what some companies that I mentioned have done, and fold the role into other roles, right? And the PM roles are, as you said, like designers, engineers can step up, PMM can step up and do those things. And this is probably a I'm sorry in advance to my PM friends if you're listening, but I always said that PM is a job for people without talent. So I was coaching a machine learning engineer who just transitioned to be a PM, and he was asking me about PM stuff like how to do user research, etc. My first question to him was, why did you make the transition? Like, because product managers is a role for people without talent like me. Like, if I were a machine learning engineer, if I could do that, I would rather do that. So I think honestly, a PM skills are easily um, attained by other functions. And again, unless product managers can prove that they can bring value beyond that, I don't see the role surviving, because technically, like a head of strategy, or with just one head of strategy or one head of product now, um, can just lean into the engineers and designers to self-manage themselves with just one high-level direction, right?
I can't believe I'm saying this, but I do think there's tremendous value in having a good PM. And I also think that it's really hard to be a good PM because I think
Wow.
there's a, it is because there's so many bad PMs I've worked with. And I'm just like,
Mm,
this must be really hard to do well because there's so many ones who I find to be extremely frustrating to work with.
mm.
So, I mean, I just want to answer this question real quick because Irina asked, like, how would you describe a bad PM? Because I've been saying bad PM, subpar PM. Like, what does that mean exactly? And I've thought about this a lot. Like, why did I have such a hard time working with this PM? And beyond like all the personality challenges of working with someone who's difficult to work with, I'll give some more tangible examples. Like, I've been in situations where there were no roadmaps at all. There was no roadmap. There's no strategy being communicated. And eventually, if I pressured them enough, like, where's the roadmap? Hey, you're a PM, you got to have a roadmap. It's like me not having designs. Like, what if I just
Mm.
came in and just talked about what I'm going to design to the engineer and then they create that, right? That's kind of the same thing you're doing to me here. And eventually they would deliver a backlog called a roadmap. And I'm like, okay, what is the difference between a backlog and a roadmap? And their answers weren't really satisfactory. Like, that's when I would think, okay, you're probably not a great PM if you cannot deliver a living roadmap and you can't tell the difference between a roadmap and a backlog. Um, Other examples would be they haven't worked with designers before, really. And to me, I think that's kind of a requirement if you're working on products that are user facing. It's like designers who've never worked with PMs and engineers before. Like, would you consider a designer to be a senior designer if they never worked with PM? Probably not. You would say you might be experienced, but you kind of lack these senior attributes that we might be looking for. So it's not about being junior or not. Like,
Mm.
again, I haven't worked with any junior PMs really. Like, I've worked with a few and they were actually great to work with because they recognize that they're just starting out and they have a lot to learn. The most frustrating ones I worked with were typically senior lead director level who know a lot about the technology or the industry, but or they've been around the company for a very long time, but they just don't know how to build products. Like the idea that they might be a waiter, as Melissa Perry would call it, is just kind of, it would blow their mind. Like they get offended if I bring up that book and say, you might be under the waiter category. You're just kind of waiting for the senior stakeholders to tell you exactly what to deliver, and then you run off and tell us what to build. So to me, that's like a few key examples. Other than that, it's like they don't really believe in user research in any way. They tend to talk to the customers directly, and they consider that to be user research. They would directly ask questions like, if we were to build this, would you buy this for this much money? And what shall we build? What do you think is, what do we need to build for you to work with us, for you to purchase our products? And they think that's user research. They take that feedback back and they say, this is what we're going to build now, and that's how they justify it. And if I try to explain why this might be very leading, this might not be proper user research, then I get told that I'm just, being too academic about it, etc. So that's kind of how I define it. And I think these are like very base level things. It's not exactly, I'm not asking for the world here. I'm just saying you need to be able to strategize. You need to be able to communicate. You need to come up with a strategy. You need to communicate the strategy, make sure there's alignment across all the teams. Because if you were to ask a designer and an engineer about what we should be doing this quarter or this month, and they have different answers, and if you ask them why we're doing it this way and they have different answers, then there's an issue there. Like, I feel like the PM isn't really doing the PM function. So that's kind of my definition. What are yours? Sorry for the long-winded.
Definitely lack of vision. Basically, like the lack of roadmap is the symptom of lack of vision, right? They don't have a clear view about what they're trying to achieve, and maybe just moving over backlog from quarter to the other quarter. Like, oh yeah, this is what we said we're going to do. We haven't gotten around to it. Like lack of vision. I would add to being too focused on just one side. Again, PM has to juggle these three things: business viability, user desirability, and tech feasibility. So if you are too centered on one of those three things and forget about the other areas, that's usually going to mean that you are making a bad decision. And usually, which way they are leaning to would depend on their background before they became a PM. Because again, PM is not an entry-level position. So usually they already have 5 years of experience doing something else. If they came from sales or account management, they will be more business-centric. They come from operations, they're usually more user-centric. Or an engineers or data scientist would be very tech-centric. So I think a good PM, or if the question is what a bad PM, a bad PM will be too polarized into one side. Can I add, because there was a comment here from Johan, increase the beef level. Can I add my definition of a bad designer?
Yes, go for it.
I found it really frustrating, and I'm not saying that this is a bad designer. Actually, maybe they're just doing their job, and maybe I do appreciate the discourse actually, because if it's not them who advocate for this, then who would? I found it really frustrating when a designer refuses to work within the constraint that we have. Let's say, we only have 2 months to build this feature. This feature is needed to showcase to investors for a fundraising, for example, the next fundraising event. We need to showcase that we have built this feature, and this feature has got some traction. Work within that constraint. Am I cut off? Can you still hear me?
Yeah, you cut off a little bit. So you said we still need to work within this constraint.
Yeah, and I've worked with some designers who refuse to work within that constraint, and just like I don't care how quickly we want this to be done. This is my design process, and these are the kind of research that I need to do before I could design anything. I think it's important to clarify, like, to create a framework within your company, whether this is an experiment, a feature, or an infrastructure, right? And there is a trade-off between speed and quality in the different type of build. Like if it's an experiment, you want to go towards speed, because we just want to get this as soon as possible and test it, and not quality. If it's an infrastructure type of thing, then you want to err on the side of quality. And if it's a feature, it's somewhere in the middle. And of course, it's a spectrum. So I think it's important that you share the same language and you can communicate, okay, guys, sorry, I know that you don't like cutting corners, but this one is just an experiment. And we need to get this out quickly.
So, are you saying that there should be some kind of decision scaffolding or framework before you start having these conversations so that you can apply those principles to your decision making?
Yeah.
So you're not arguing about it. Okay, I think that's perfectly fair.
Yeah.
And we got some criticism here. Agree. Much of this convo is about design. Research was mentioned at the start, but otherwise, we're primarily talking about design. Usability, testing, and other types of foundational research need to be considered too. I think that's a fair criticism. My experience is that I haven't worked with that many researchers as a designer because the teams I've been on have always been fairly small, and design has taken on the research mantle. So that's a pretty common argument that I find myself having. Like, we don't have any measurements of, how well are these things going. We need to do a little bit more usability testing. There's no generative research. There's no foundational research. And, I feel like I carry on the mantle of a researcher in many ways because I've always been arguing for these things, but we never get it. Like, this is something that is rarely ever achieved. Is there a way to achieve that? Like, is it just like most teams just don't have the resources and we just need to abandon it? Or is there some kind of is there a way from a product side? Is there some magic word that the UX researcher designer can say to convince product, or some kind of argument we can make?
Definitely a foolproof argument to me that would convince me that we need to do more research is if they said we have tried this multiple times before. So this is not the first attempt. You can't just convince us that we need something quick to build to the users. No, we have attempted multiple times before. It didn't work for a reason. We need to find out what the reason is and design a proper solution for this. So I would definitely not go against research if we have done multiple attempts. I guess what's frustrated me is if in my head, like, the solution is so obvious, like so simple, because it's just so broken right now, and then the designer or researcher still insist on doing lots and lots of research. I think maybe, like, bringing back a little bit to the original topic about the importance of researchers. My personal opinion is that a company should hire a dedicated researcher or dedicated team of researchers if they actually have the capacity, the resources to work on the actions, the insights of those research. When I was at Facebook, the most frustrated group of people that I met are the user researchers, because they do like amazing research, like they derive amazing insights from the users, really high quality piece of research. They spend months to do the research and wrote down everything, and then nobody actioned it. Like the PMs, the leadership team, simply don't care enough to. Well, I make a blanket statement. While Facebook was a 20,000 company when I was there, and now I think maybe like 60,000 people company. So of course, when I said they don't care, there will be some teams and some leaders who care. But the people that I work with, they were frustrated because nobody was there to action on their research. And what I have found working quite well was actually at Shopify. So to be transparent, though, Shopify did lay off, I think, 75% of their researchers before I joined. So the researchers that had stayed within Shopify when I joined, they are A, very senior, and B, they only have a quarter of the number. So one UX researcher sits across, so she works directly with my product director. My product director had a team of 10 PMs and like 8 to 10 PMs. And then each underneath, we have like 10 engineers in each squad. So like a team of 80 engineers roughly for one user researcher. And what this user researcher did was generative research, like really understanding the fundamental, like mental models of our merchants. And her research informs the strategy, like the vision and the strategy of the department, instead of just informing the what feature we should build within a squad. So I found that model really well. And for lower level research, including small generative research for lower level items and usability testing, are done by the PMs and the designers within the squad. Yeah, I don't like the idea of doing lots of research when we don't have bandwidth basically to action any of those.
So I think I agree with that. Like it's kind of like if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, did it really fall, right? Like if you're creating all this really valuable research, but there's no way to action upon it, it kind of falls on deaf ears. So, but I did notice that your ratio of researchers to PMs to engineers is pretty skewed. So to most researchers, like the ideal ratio would be one researcher to one PM to a team of engineers, so that the researcher is really dedicated to the entire vertical or market that the PM is focused on. Do you see it as less or fewer than that, or is it what's your thinking around that?
I think this, practically speaking, if the team of engineers can have enough bandwidth to action, yes. In that case, then I would want a bigger engineering team. So I also think that sometimes the ratio between PM and engineers are too high. Like one PM for engineers, I think it's too high. I would rather have a bigger engineering team.
So you want like 1 to 8 or something?
Yeah, because
Okay.
idle PMs who don't have enough engineering resources, idle PMs are not happy PMs. They're frustrated, and when they don't have enough authority, like enough scope, not authority, enough scope, then everyone else within the squad, I think, gets pushed as well, because the PM would want to do more and more, and then the designer probably would do less and less. The researcher would do less and less. So I think probably a good ratio would be 1 to 8 to 10 engineers, I would say. You can argue that you probably need 2 designers or 1 designer, depending on how visually oriented all the features are. Sometimes some features don't require design at all because there's no front end. Yeah, but in terms of the ideal ratio for a researcher, I personally found when there's 1 researcher for 1 PM, 1 engineering team, that's too much, because especially 1 PM, 1 designer, 1 researcher for each engineering team, that's too much, personally.
Okay. I feel like Irina has a great question here that I wanted to ask as well. Like, whose responsibility is it to make sure that the research conducted by the researchers are actionable? Because if they're trying to discover things that just kind of becomes way too large to action upon, something went wrong there, right? Like there's a disconnect where they're focused on maybe the wrong scope, the wrong things, because they should be focused on like whatever effort they put in, 100% of it, or as high percentage as possible, should be actionable, should be actioned upon. Otherwise, it's wasted. There's a loss of efficiency there. So, what's your thinking around that? Like, how do they make sure it's aligned? Whose responsibility is it? How did it happen like that?
again, this is based on my personal experience. I think some companies didn't intend to act on the research to begin with. Hang on, can you leave? Sorry. uh,
It's okay.
Yeah, the company didn't have the right intention to act on the research to begin with. I've worked with some companies who just want to say like, oh yeah, we've talked to our users, we've ticked the box. Whether we action it or not, no, we just want to. I think I saw some comments like, we just want to validate that we are building the right thing, which is of course not the right mindset to start a research with. Like you shouldn't already have like, I just want to know whether this idea is right, and you might already have like more incentive to say that our assumption is validated. So yeah, it's whose role it is to make sure that the research are being actioned upon. Probably the PMs, I would say, like especially if the PMs are the one directing like the research direction. Yeah, because I don't think as a researcher, and please feel free to disagree here, I don't think as a researcher you can influence much whether your insights are being actioned on, right? Like, hey, care more about my work, like that you, it should come from the other side. They should be the one like, hey, can you, we have this problem, we don't know enough about the users, do you have any insight on that? If not, can you do it? So the other side has to want it. You can't push it.
I actually think it's everyone's responsibility. Like researchers should definitely understand what they're outputting and how that could be actioned upon and how that will be built. Like how would that convert into a product feature or improvement or change? And if they don't understand that, then it's probably going to impact their ability to do really focused research because they're just thinking like all over the place. But if they're product minded, it can help a lot to drive what kind of focus and what direction the research is taking. Because as you're doing research, you start to hone in on specific things and you have to make decisions as to what to focus on here versus there. But yeah, we're actually at time right now. Do you have a few more minutes or do you
Yeah,
have to go?
I can. Can I just highlight like a comment from Ricardo here? I think a lot of this goes
Yeah.
back to good versus bad PMs, and maybe this is the right point to conclude. I don't know if you have any other plan to conclude the session. What I wanted to say, so I agree with this statement, but what I wanted to say is usually bad PMs is a symptom of a bad organization. So they're incentivized. Like, well, first of all, they were hired, right? They were hired. So somebody made the wrong hiring decision, or maybe they were a good PM before, but then they were incentivized on other things. So PMs are often the canary in the coal mine. I think that's the phrase. Like if an organization is bad, usually the PM is the first one to notice it, because yeah, PM sits inside, like in the middle of so many different things. So a bad PM is a symptom of a bad organization, I would say.
I have a good question for you then, because throughout this conversation, I feel like you would be someone I would love to work with as a designer who, is very much focused on strategy and research. You seem to get what I'm like. We're in agreement on more things than not, at least all the important things. How should I, as a designer, find other PMs like you? Like, what kind of questions should I be asking to identify a good PM such as yourself that I would enjoy working with versus one that's going to cause me headaches later on? And maybe this is kind of like, what are your processes to make sure that a company is compatible with your belief system as a PM and it's going to nurture you versus fight against you?
Yeah, I'll answer the latter part first. Because again, if the PM is not pushed by the business to do certain things, I believe that a normal PM, not a really bad one, wouldn't also push the designers, the engineers, the researchers to do certain things, certain ways. So I'm answering from the PM side here. I usually ask about what are your biggest user pain points that you're addressing, and if they already can't answer that question from the user's point of view, and just answer like, oh yeah, because we have this offering for the users. I was like, no, that's not the question. What pain points are you addressing? So I would ask them questions about the users, to understand whether they actually understand their users. I would ask questions about the current roadmap and how are things decided, like how do you decide what things to build. I would ask about basically the scope of this role. Like, do you already know what to build and you just want me to execute, or do you actually want somebody who has to figure this out from scratch? And I would be erring towards the latter type of organizations.
Got it. So the question you really have around this is, what are the problems you want me to solve? And if they cannot tell the difference between a problem and a solution, then that's going to be an issue. Okay, that's fair. I feel like designers often do the same thing when we talk to product managers. Like, what is the problem that you want to solve by bringing me on board? There's a comment made by Peter Merholz that I can't seem to find a highlight, but it's on the other window, and it says that Peter says the other thing to recognize is that for any customer / user facing product, UX and PM are basically the same thing. And I think on the surface, I'm like, huh? But as I think about it more, like, I agree with that in many ways. I feel like as a designer, I'm taking on a lot of the PM tasks, and PMs are probably doing the same thing, vice versa. I guess my question then becomes, there's a number of designers who would like to move into the PM role, and they've done a lot of PM work, but they've never held the PM title. From your viewpoint as an interviewer and chief product officer, what kind of advice can you give them to help them make this transition? Like, how do they get the first PM role? What should they be doing or showing in the resume or experience or talking about?
The first advice is don't become a PM. It's a shitty job. But if you still want to become a PM, again, because a PM has to juggle the three sides of the solution, right? You come from, I assume that you are amazing at the user-centered thinking. You need to show that you have business acumen, like commercial ability, maybe also like critical thinking around the commercial side, like how can we sell this? How can we make this more profitable? And then I would also want to get at least a passable technical acumen as well. Like you know what kind of things takes months to build versus weeks to build at the very least. But the element that I think as a designer, you need to really highlight in your interviews, I would say, is the commercial element, because that's the part that I usually see product designers lacking.
Can you define that a little bit more? When you say commercial, is it you're talking about the business metrics, the finances, or understanding how the business makes a profit? What's a question you might ask if I were interviewing for a PM role with you right now? How would you differentiate between, how would you make sure that I'm a commercial minded designer or / PM versus one that is not?
So if this is the behavioral type interview, so I'm asking you about your past experience instead of doing a live case study, I would ask questions about, so you'll walk through your past product, and then I will ask, like, who are the users? How did you make money? How do you make money if you're still there? Who are the competitors? Like, if the users are not using your product, what will they be using? How is your product different? Like, if you have to say increase the revenue or the usage, if sometimes usage and revenue are not always they're directly correlated depending on the product. So let's say we can use usage as a proxy. Like, if you have to 2x the usage, let's say, in the next 1 year, how would you do it? So it's less about building the most beautiful feature for the users, but how do we actually make sure that the business has like sustainable growth of revenue.
Got it. Got it. Okay, this has been so insightful, and I very much appreciate the generosity of your time. Do you have anything to plug? I know you used to have a Maven course that was very, very well rated, and you said you're no longer doing it, but are you coaching? Are you doing anything else right now that other people
Um,
should be aware of?
no, not really. My 2024 intention is I want to calm down a little bit. I think last year I did a little bit too much. I was thinking to start a newsletter. I have bought a domain, ctodiary.com, that I haven't done anything with. So yeah, if you can just follow me on LinkedIn, and maybe yeah, at some point this year probably I'll launch the newsletter. But yeah, I have nothing to plug right now. I just really enjoy this conversation. I always enjoy a healthy discourse between like PM, UX designers, engineers. So yeah, thank you for having me.
No, thank you. You've been so generous with your time, and I love your candor as well. I thank you for not taking any of my baits and trying to pick a fight. But yeah, this has been awesome and phenomenal. Thank you so much, Debbie. Please, everyone, follow Debbie Wijaya on LinkedIn. She's wonderful. I really enjoyed this conversation. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care.
Bye.